The temple halls of Raxton Prime stretched upward into shadows that even the ceremonial flames could not penetrate. Marcus Webb stood among the gathered delegates, his worn jacket a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor surrounding him. He shifted his weight, feeling the unfamiliar gravity pull at his bones, while the alien dignitaries murmured in their various languages. The summit had been called to negotiate mining rights in the neutral zone, but like all such gatherings, it had devolved into a display of cultural superiority. The Vrax took every opportunity to remind the younger species of their ancient heritage and divine connections. High Cleric, Vorn stood at the center of the great hall. His 4 arms spread wide in a gesture of welcome that somehow managed to convey condescension. His crystalline eyes swept across the assembly, lingering on Marcus with what might have been amusement. "We gather beneath the blade of eternity," Vorn announced, his voice resonating through translation devices. "A weapon forged by the first gods themselves when our world was young. For 10,000 cycles it has rested here, waiting for one worthy to claim it." Marcus glanced up at the sword mounted on the wall above the altar. Even from this distance, he could see it was impressive. Nearly 2 meters of dark metal that seemed to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it. The hilt was wrapped in some kind of leather that had survived millennia without decay. "Many have tried to lift the blade," Vorn continued, gesturing to the pedestal below it. "Warriors, kings, champions of 100 worlds. All have failed. The gods themselves decreed that only one of pure divine essence could bear its weight." A Krell ambassador, her scales gleaming in the firelight, clicked her mandibles skeptically. "Surely this is metaphor, not literal truth." Vorn's expression hardened. "You doubt the word of the Vrax? Perhaps you would care to make the attempt yourself." The Krell diplomat wisely declined with a wave of her. For Claw, Marcus found himself staring at the blade with growing recognition. Something about the crossguard design, the way the fuller ran down the center of the blade, the slight curve near the point. He had seen something similar before, though he could not quite place where. "Of course," Vorn said, his tone dripping with false magnanimity. "Any delegate is welcome to attempt the trial. We Vrax do not discriminate. Even the youngest species may try their hand, though we counsel humility in the face of divine will." Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. No one wanted to be the fool who failed publicly at moving an ancient relic. Marcus raised his hand, the murmuring stopped. Vorn's crystalline eyes fixed on him with surprise that quickly transformed into poorly concealed delight. "The human wishes to try?" Vorn's tone suggested he had just been handed an unexpected gift. "By all means, please approach." Marcus walked forward, his boots echoing on the stone floor. He heard whispers behind him in a dozen languages, most of them pitying. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as decent diplomats and clever engineers, but they lacked the physical prowess of the Krell or the mystical traditions of the Vrax. He stood before the pedestal. Up close, the blade was even more familiar. The pommel had a distinctive octagonal shape, and the leather wrapping showed a diamond pattern he had definitely seen before. "Whenever you are ready," Vorn said, barely suppressing his amusement. "Simply grasp the hilt and lift. The gods will judge your worthiness." Marcus reached up and took hold of the grip. The leather was cool and smooth under his palm. He lifted. The sword came free with no resistance whatsoever. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus turned the blade over in his hands, examining it with the eye of someone who had spent too many weekends at estate sales and flea markets. The weight was good, the balance near perfect. He could see where someone had attempted artificially age the pommel with acid, but they had missed a spot where the modern stainless steel showed through. "Huh," Marcus said, his voice loud in the shocked silence. "I thought so." "Impossible," Vorn writhed. His 4 arms had gone rigid at his sides. No mortal should be able to lift the blade of eternity. You must be blessed by the gods themselves. Not exactly, Marcus said, turning the sword to show the small marking near the crossguard. See this mark here? That is from a company called United Cutlery. They made replica swords for movies and collectors back on Earth, probably around 2015 or so. He ran his thumb along the blade, which was completely dull despite its menacing appearance. This is what we call a wall hanger. Looks impressive, but completely non-functional as an actual weapon. The tang is probably welded, not forged, which means it would snap if you actually tried to use it in combat. Thorn had gone very still. You claim this is not the blade of eternity. I claim this is a $30 movie prop that someone sold at a yard sale, Marcus said. I should know. I bought one almost exactly like it 3 years ago from a guy in Nevada who was cleaning out his garage. Came in a cardboard box with a certificate of authenticity that was not worth the paper it was printed on. The other delegates had pressed closer, murmuring among themselves. The Krell ambassador let out a sound that might have been laughter. This is heresy, Vorn sputtered, his composure cracking. The blade has been in our temple for 10,000 cycles. Your temple might be 10,000 years old, Marcus agreed, but this blade is maybe 20 years old at most. The leather wrap alone would have rotted away centuries ago if it was actually ancient. And that black finish? That is called powder coating. Very popular in the early 21st century. Earth. Completely anachronistic for a weapon that is supposedly older than human civilization. He hefted the blade again, feeling the cheap construction. Also, no one could lift it because you welded the tang to the mounting bracket. I felt it give way when I pulled. You probably did that to keep people from examining it too closely. Vorn's crystalline eyes had taken on a dangerous glint, but Marcus was past caring about diplomatic niceties. He had sat through 3 days of the Vrax, lecturing the other species about their cultural and spiritual superiority. Let me guess how this happened, Marcus continued. A few decades ago, maybe a century at most, some human trader came through your system. He had a box of cheap replica weapons he was trying to unload. Your ancestors bought this one, liked how it looked, and mounted it in the temple. Over time, the story grew. Maybe it was deliberate fraud, maybe just legend building on itself. Either way, you have been using a yard sale special to prop up your claims of divine favor. The High Cleric seemed to have aged a century in the last few minutes. Around them, the other delegates were no longer hiding their reactions. Some looked amused, others sympathetic, but none looked impressed by the Vrax anymore. The question is, Marcus said, his voice gentler now, what do we do about it? He looked at the sword in his hands and at Vorn's stricken face. For all his arrogance, the cleric clearly believed in his own civilization's greatness. Having that foundation kicked out from under him was not something Marcus took pleasure in. Here's what I think, Marcus said. The blade is not divine, but your civilization is still 10,000 years old. Your architecture is magnificent, your literature profound, your scientific contributions significant. You do not need a magic sword to prove your worth to the galaxy. He held out the blade to Vorn, hilt first. Take it back. Put it away somewhere private. Tell your people the gods have decreed the age of the blade has passed, or that it has fulfilled its purpose, or whatever lets everyone save face. Then maybe try building relationships with other species based on mutual respect instead of claims of divine superiority. Vorn stared at the offered blade for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached out with 2 of his 4 hands and took it. His crystalline eyes met Marcus's, and something passed between them that did not require translation. The human speaks wisdom, Vorn said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps we have held too tightly to the past and lost sight of the present. Marcus nodded and stepped back. The other delegates began to murmur again, but the tone had changed. What had been a display of dominance had become something more interesting. A genuine negotiation between equals. As Marcus returned to his place in the assembly, the Krell ambassador leaned over to him. "How did you know it was a fake?" she asked quietly. Marcus grinned. "I have one in my apartment back on Earth. Paid $20 for it at an estate sale." The guy threw in a fantasy dagger and a letter opener shaped like a dragon for free. The Krell made that laughing sound again. "Humans," she said, shaking her head. "You find the strangest ways to humble the mighty." "We just know our junk," Marcus replied. "When you have been to enough yard sales, you develop an eye for this kind of thing." The summit continued, but the tone had shifted. The Vraks were less imperious, the other delegates more willing to engage honestly. In the end, they reached an agreement that was fair to all parties, built not on intimidation, but on genuine negotiation. As Marcus left the temple that evening, he looked back at the great halls one last time. Somewhere in there, a cheap replica sword was being quietly retired from service. He smiled. Sometimes the most important diplomatic tools were not weapons or treaties, but simply the ability to recognize a yard sale special when you saw one. If you enjoyed this video, consider supporting us with super thanks. Your support helps us create more Gray.